My name is Simone. I am 34 years old, and I built my wealth in the quiet shadows while my husband bathed in the spotlight. Last Thursday at 2 in the morning, the heavy oak door of our Atlanta penthouse clicked open. Marcus, my husband of 7 years, stumbled inside. The distinct scent of vanilla and sandalwood filled the hallway. It was a very expensive perfume that I absolutely do not wear. I sat on the velvet sofa holding a glass of Cabernet, just watching him in the dim light. He loosened his silk tie, caught my eye, and smirked. He did not look guilty at all. He looked incredibly entitled. He walked over, poured himself a drink, and told me that sometimes a man just needs a little space to clear his head from the pressure of building an empire. He said a woman like me would not understand the stress of real corporate leadership. I did not scream. I did not throw my wine in his face. I simply smiled, nodded, and went to sleep. What Marcus did not realize was that the empire he claimed to be building was entirely funded by my silent capital. The next morning, while he was still snoring in our guest room, I made one quiet phone call to my wealth management team. By exactly 12 noon, his smug smile would be permanently erased. Before I dive into the details of this absolute nightmare, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to quietly dismantle a narcissist who thought they held all the cards. Your support helps me share these stories of taking back our power. Growing up in a hardworking household on the south side of Chicago, I learned early on that money talks, but wealth whispers. My mother worked 2 grueling jobs just to send me to a top university, and I spent the last decade turning a modest stock portfolio into a multi-million-dollar private equity firm. I do not do magazine covers. I do not do flashy social media posts. I just do the math, and I always win. Marcus, on the other hand, was born into a family that valued appearance over absolutely everything else. His mother Brenda raised him to believe the sun rose and set on his shoulders simply because he was a handsome, charismatic man. He expected the world to bow to him, and for the last few years, I had allowed him to believe it actually did. But that night, sitting in the dark with the foul smell of another woman lingering in my beautiful home, I realized my endless patience had finally run out. The man peacefully sleeping down the hall was about to learn a very hard lesson. The woman he thought was just a quiet and submissive wife was actually the architect of his entire reality. And I was finally ready to tear his fake kingdom straight to the ground. When Friday morning rolled around, the Atlanta sun was pouring through our massive floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the imported hardwood floors. I was already awake and sitting at the white marble kitchen island. I had a warm matcha latte in one hand and my tablet in the other, quietly reviewing the overnight European market reports. My breathing was steady, and my mind was razor-sharp. I heard the heavy footsteps of my husband echoing down the hallway before he even appeared. Marcus strutted into the kitchen, looking like he had just stepped off the cover of a luxury lifestyle magazine. He wore a bespoke navy blue suit that hugged his shoulders perfectly, a crisp white shirt pressed to absolute perfection, and a pair of Italian leather loafers that cost more than my mother used to make in a solid month. He stood in front of the smart refrigerator, using its tinted glass surface as a mirror to adjust his silk pocket square. He spent a solid 5 minutes fixing his appearance without saying a single word to me. He did not offer an apology for coming home at 2 in the morning. He did not offer an explanation. He simply expected the world to resume spinning on his axis. Finally, he turned around, took a sip of the coffee I had brewed, and immediately grimaced. He let out a loud, dramatic sigh and complained that the roast was too bitter. He poured the entire mug down the expensive stainless steel sink and leaned against the counter, crossing his arms to look at me. "Are you still playing around with those little stock graphs this morning?" he asked, gesturing toward my tablet with a dismissive wave of his hand. "You really need to take a break from your petty investing hobby, Simone. It is not healthy for a woman to stress her brain over pennies, especially on a day like today. Today is about real wealth. Today is about legacy." I kept my eyes locked on the glowing screen of my tablet, my heart beat in a slow and calculated rhythm. Marcus was the chief executive officer of a tech startup called Next Gen Solutions. In his mind, he was a visionary genius destined to be the next big billionaire in Silicon Valley. He gave flashy motivational speeches to his staff, he rented premium office space downtown, and he drove a sleek black Porsche that he loved to flaunt on social media. What Marcus did not know was that Next Gen Solutions had been bleeding money for 3 straight years. His revolutionary software was full of critical bugs, and his client retention rate was plummeting faster than a stone in water. He blew company funds on lavish corporate retreats, expensive steakhouse lunches, and luxury cars, while his actual developers were threatening to quit over unpaid bonuses. More importantly, he had absolutely no idea that the anonymous venture capital firm keeping his precious company afloat was entirely controlled by me. I was the silent majority shareholder. I paid his exorbitant salary. I covered the lease for his fancy office. I was the invisible hand keeping his massive ego inflated. I did all of this because 3 years ago his mother Brenda had called me sobbing on the phone. She had begged me to use my financial connections to save her perfect son from total bankruptcy. I had bought into that toxic narrative that a strong Black woman needs to hold her family together at all costs. I loved him back then, so I created a blind trust and funneled millions of my own hard-earned money into his failing project just to protect his fragile pride. But as he stood there in my kitchen, smelling faintly of his expensive body wash, trying to mask the lingering ghost of another woman's perfume, all my love morphed into absolute disgust. The man looking down at me was a parasite wearing a designer suit. "I am meeting with the major investors at noon today," Marcus continued, oblivious to the storm brewing right in front of him. "They are flying in just to see my final pitch for the Series A funding round. We are talking about $10 million, Simone. $10 million. Once this deal is locked in and the ink is dry, you can finally quit stressing over your little online portfolios. You can focus on decorating the penthouse or joining one of those charity boards. You know, my mother always says a successful man needs a wife who creates a peaceful sanctuary for him, not one who tries to compete in the business world." I slowly set my tablet face down on the marble counter. I looked up at him and forced my facial muscles into the most supportive, loving smile I could possibly muster. "You are absolutely right, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice perfectly sweet and perfectly submissive. "I am so incredibly proud of you. I know you have worked tirelessly to build this company from the ground up. You deserve every single thing that is coming to you today." Marcus smiled a bright, white, arrogant grin that made my stomach physically turn. He loved nothing more than having his ego stroked. He walked over, leaned down, and kissed the top of my head. It was a patronizing kiss. The kind of kiss you give a child who just handed you a messy drawing. He checked his heavy gold watch, the very same watch I had bought him for our 5th anniversary. "I need to head to the office early to prep the boardroom and get the team in line," he said, grabbing his sleek leather briefcase from the counter. "Oh, and Simone, one more thing. About the celebration dinner tonight at the steakhouse. The investors are very traditional guys. Old money. I think it would be best if you did not wear your hair natural tonight. Maybe get it straightened or styled professionally. We want to project the right corporate image. You understand, right?" The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this man hit me like a physical blow. He had spent the night wrapped in the arms of another woman, and now he was standing in the penthouse that I paid for, telling me to alter my natural black hair to appease his imaginary investors. It took every ounce of discipline I possessed not to laugh right in his face. My mother raised me better than to show my hand before the winning card was played. "Of course, honey," I replied, my voice as smooth as silk. "I will make sure everything is absolutely perfect for tonight. Today is going to be a day you will never ever forget." "Good girl," he said, winking at me before turning on his heel. I watched him strut down the hallway, his posture screaming of unearned confidence. The heavy oak front door opened and closed with a solid thud. The lock clicked shut, echoing through the quiet apartment. The second I was entirely alone in the penthouse, The sweet, submissive wife act evaporated into thin air. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stood up from the kitchen island and left my matcha latte behind. I walked straight down the long hallway toward my private home office. I bypassed the mahogany desk and went directly to the large framed piece of modern art hanging on the far wall. I swung the painting open to reveal a heavy steel wall safe securely embedded in the concrete. I quickly punched in the 6-digit passcode, and the heavy door hissed open. Inside, sitting right next to my passport and emergency cash reserves, was a thick manila folder. Stamped right on the front, in bold black ink, was the corporate logo for Next Gen Solutions. I pulled the heavy folder out and traced my manicured fingernail over the logo. It contained every single financial record, every hidden debt, every manipulated expense report, and the master operating agreement that gave my blind trust absolute power over his entire existence. I held the physical proof of his impending ruin in my hands, and a slow, dark smirk spread across my face. Marcus wanted space. He wanted to play the role of the untouchable corporate king. I was about to give him exactly what he asked for. I slipped the heavy manila folder into my black leather designer tote bag and locked the wall safe. I walked out of the penthouse down to the private resident garage and completely bypassed the row of flashy sports cars that Marcus loved to pose next to for his social media followers. I climbed into my sleek and unassuming luxury sedan and drove myself downtown. The morning traffic was relatively light, but my mind was moving at absolute warp speed, calculating every single variable of the strike I was about to execute. Marcus truly believed that my daily work consisted of trading penny stocks on my laptop while watching daytime television. He actually thought my office downtown was just a shared co-working space that I rented a few days a week just to feel important and get out of the house. The reality of my life was vastly different. I pulled up to a towering glass high-rise located right in the pulsing heart of the Atlanta financial district. I did not rent a small desk in this building. I owned the entire 42nd floor. I handed my keys to the private valet and took the executive elevator straight up. When the heavy glass doors slid open, they revealed the pristine headquarters of Vanguard Apex Capital. This was my firm. As I walked down the long corridor, junior financial analysts and senior portfolio managers physically stepped aside to greet me with genuine respect and more than a little fear. There was no fake motivational chanting here. There were no indoor ping-pong tables, no beer kegs in the break room, and absolutely no flashy neon signs like Marcus had at his childish tech startup. This was a sanctuary where real immense wealth was moved quietly and ruthlessly. We managed hundreds of millions of dollars in private equity. My daily routine involved buying out failing mid-level companies, completely gutting their inefficient management teams, and selling their assets for massive profits. I was not a bored housewife playing with a monthly allowance. I was the apex predator of the Atlanta financial ecosystem, and Marcus was nothing but a small, sick fish swimming in my private pond. I walked past the glass-walled conference rooms and entered my private corner office. The expansive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding, unobstructed view of the entire city skyline. If I stood close enough to the glass, I could actually see the commercial building where Marcus leased his office just a few blocks away. My executive assistant, Marcus, did not even know I had an assistant stepped into the room. Her name was Elena, and she was incredibly efficient. She poured me a fresh cup of dark roast black coffee, set it on my desk, and quietly closed the solid oak door, leaving me in absolute privacy. I sat down in my high-backed leather executive chair and placed the Next Gen Solutions folder right in the center of my massive mahogany desk. I opened it and spread the legal documents out in a neat, precise line. I glanced at the digital clock on my computer monitor. It was exactly 11:15 in the morning. I had exactly 45 minutes to completely dismantle a man who had drained 7 years of my life. I picked up my encrypted secure phone and dialed the direct private line of my lead corporate attorney. His name was Richard, and he charged over $1,000 an hour because he was quite simply the most ruthless financial lawyer in the entire state of Georgia. He answered on the very first ring. "Good morning, Simone," Richard said, his voice crisp and alert. "I sincerely hope you are calling to tell me you are finally cutting the dead weight." Richard knew exactly who and what Marcus was. 3 years ago, he was the one who drafted the original blind trust that kept the Next Gen Solutions payroll funded. He had heavily advised against saving my husband from bankruptcy, but he respected my decision as a wife. However, Richard was a shark just like me, and he made absolutely sure to build in a fail-safe. He had engineered a hidden trapdoor deep within the corporate bylaws of Marcus's company. Today, I was finally pulling the lever. "I am calling to trigger the morality clause in the Next Gen Master Funding Agreement, Richard," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any hesitation. "I want the immediate execution of Clause Section 4, Paragraph B." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a low, dark chuckle. "I have been waiting 3 long years for you to say those exact words, Simone," he replied. "What is the triggering event? Do we have solid, indisputable proof?" I looked down at the highlighted financial statements I had meticulously cross-referenced the night before. "We have gross misuse of corporate funds combined with a blatant violation of the Executive Ethics Agreement," I explained, leaning forward in my chair. "Marcus has been quietly funneling company money through a phantom vendor account for the past 6 months. He used those embezzled funds to sign a lease on a luxury condominium in Midtown Atlanta. He is housing a mistress there. The paper trail he left is incredibly sloppy. He actually used the corporate expense account to buy her an imported sports car and charge high-end jewelry. The documentation is undeniable, and I have already forwarded the encrypted file to your secure inbox." I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard as Richard opened the file on his end. I could practically hear his legal mind spinning up to speed. "This is beautiful, Simone," he said, his voice laced with professional satisfaction. "This is a clear-cut breach of fiduciary duty. I can have the trust dissolved entirely. I want more than just a dissolution," I told him, my tone turning completely ice-cold. "I want our entire 70% equity stake pulled immediately. That will effectively bankrupt Next Gen Solutions before the banks close today. Furthermore, I want all associated corporate bank accounts frozen, pending a full forensic audit. I want his business credit lines completely slashed to zero." Richard stopped typing. The legal machinery was already shifting into high gear. He asked me about the specific timeline for the execution. I turned my head and looked at the beautiful antique grandfather clock standing in the corner of my office. It was exactly 11:45. Marcus is scheduled to pitch a Series A funding round to a group of conservative Silicon Valley investors at exactly noon today, I told him. He thinks this specific deal will make him a billionaire and solidify his fake legacy. I want the financial freeze to hit the banking servers at exactly 12 o'clock sharp. I want his corporate black cards declined if he tries to buy those men lunch. I want the building management company to revoke his electronic elevator access for failure to pay the office lease. I want his entire world to stop spinning right when he is standing at the very top of his imaginary mountain. "Consider it done," Simone, Richard said. "The official termination notices will be delivered electronically to his entire executive board at noon. The banking institutions will lock the accounts simultaneously. There is absolutely no way out of this for him. He will not even have the funds to buy a cup of coffee by the time I am finished. Enjoy the show." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair. The room was perfectly silent except for the steady rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock. Tick, tick, tick. It was 11:55 in the morning. I turned my chair to face the massive window looking out over the sprawling city. The sun was shining brightly, reflecting off the glass towers. I pictured Marcus in my mind. He was probably standing in a sleek modern boardroom right now, adjusting his expensive silk tie, flashing that fake arrogant smile and preparing to sell a massive dream that he did not even own. He was probably looking down at his phone, wondering why I had not sent him a good luck text message yet. I picked up my porcelain cup and took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. The dark, bitter liquid warmed my throat as I watched the minute hand on the clock slowly click forward. The clock ticked down to 12 noon. I took another sip and simply waited for the collapse. While I sat in the quiet luxury of my office enjoying the bitter taste of my coffee, Marcus was exactly 3 miles away living out the final moments of his delusion. He was sitting in the private dining room of an exclusive high-end steakhouse located right in the bustling center of Midtown Atlanta. He was hosting 3 older conservative venture capitalists from Silicon Valley. These were the exact type of men Marcus desperately wanted to impress. They wore expensive tailored suits, possessed old money arrogance, and controlled billions in tech funding. Marcus had spent the entire morning playing the role of the visionary tech founder. He had pitched them the future of next-gen solutions, with absolute confidence painting a picture of massive global expansion. To celebrate what he thought was a guaranteed $10 million deal, Marcus had pulled out all the stops. He ordered 3 towering seafood platters, dry-aged Wagyu steaks, and 2 bottles of a rare vintage Bordeaux wine that cost $3,000 each. He laughed loudly at their terrible jokes and casually mentioned how his submissive wife was currently at home preparing a quiet dinner for them all. He was riding the ultimate high, completely intoxicated by his own fabricated success. Then the leather check folder arrived. The seasoned waiter placed it discreetly next to Marcus. With a practiced, arrogant flick of his wrist, Marcus pulled out his heavy metal corporate black card and dropped it onto the silver tray without even glancing at the total. He continued telling a story to the lead investor, flashing his bright white smile. The waiter nodded respectfully and walked away. 5 minutes passed, then 10 minutes. The conversation at the table began to lull. Finally, the restaurant manager, an older man in a sharp tuxedo, approached the table. He did not have the receipt in his hand. He looked incredibly uncomfortable. "Excuse me, sir," the manager whispered, leaning down close to Marcus so the investors would not hear. "I am so sorry to interrupt your lunch, but there seems to be an issue with your payment method. The card has been declined." Marcus stopped mid-sentence. He let out a loud, dismissive laugh to show the investors it was just a minor inconvenience. "Oh, it is probably just a ridiculous bank fraud alert," he said, waving his hand. "You know how these corporate security algorithms are when you make large purchases? Just run it again." "We have run it 3 times, sir," the manager replied, his voice remaining polite but growing firm. "We also received a hard error code from the issuing bank requesting that we retain the physical card. Do you happen to have another form of payment?" A heavy, awkward silence fell over the private dining table. The 3 Silicon Valley investors stopped eating and looked directly at Marcus. Their eyes were sharp and judgmental. Marcus felt a sudden cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. He quickly reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his personal platinum credit card. He handed it to the manager with a tight, strained smile. 2 minutes later, the manager returned. His expression was completely blank. "I am very sorry, sir, but this card has also been declined," the manager stated. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The lead investor raised an eyebrow, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Is there a financial problem here, Marcus?" he asked, his voice dripping with sudden skepticism. "If a founder cannot clear a lunch tab, it makes us wonder how he manages a multi-million-dollar payroll." "No problem at all, gentlemen," Marcus stammered, his face flushing a deep shade of crimson. "It is just a massive banking error. My accounts are perfectly fine. Please excuse me for just one moment while I call my private wealth manager and sort out this technical glitch." Marcus stood up so fast, his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He practically sprinted out of the restaurant and onto the sweltering Atlanta sidewalk. The midday sun beat down on his expensive suit, but he was shivering with panic. He pulled out his phone and rapidly dialed the elite concierge number for his corporate bank. He paced back and forth aggressively. ignoring the pedestrians walking past him. "Welcome to Premier Corporate Banking," the automated voice droned. "Please hold for your dedicated representative." When the representative finally answered, Marcus immediately started shouting. He demanded to know why a billionaire in the making was being embarrassed at a business lunch over a frozen card. The representative typed quietly for a few seconds before returning to the line. "Sir, I am looking at your corporate and personal profiles now," the representative said, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. "All of your accounts, including your primary checking, business savings, and personal credit lines, have been entirely frozen. This is not a fraud alert, sir. This is a hard legal lock." "What are you talking about?" Marcus screamed, drawing the attention of people walking down the street. "I am the chief executive officer. Unlock those accounts right now. I have $10 million sitting in that business account." "Actually, sir, you have a current balance of negative $400, the representative corrected him. "A massive capital withdrawal was executed exactly 20 minutes ago. The majority shareholder initiated an emergency morality clause termination, pulling 70% of the total equity. Because of this, your corporate accounts were flagged for insolvency. Your personal accounts were subsequently frozen due to a cross-collateralization agreement tied to your business loans. You currently have zero available liquidity." Marcus felt the ground physically drop beneath his feet. His vision blurred. He hung up the phone without another word. He did not go back inside the restaurant. He could not face those wealthy investors knowing he could not even pay for the wine he had forced them to drink. He abandoned them completely, leaving them sitting at the table with an unpaid bill. He ran 2 blocks down the street to the parking garage where he had left his Porsche. He threw himself into the driver's seat, his hands trembling uncontrollably as he gripped the leather steering wheel. He sped through the downtown traffic, running a red light in his desperation to get back to the Next Gen Solutions headquarters. He needed to get to his office. He needed to get to his computer and figure out what rogue investor had suddenly destroyed his life. He pulled up to his towering luxury office building and left the car right in the loading zone, not even caring about getting a ticket. He sprinted through the revolving glass doors and into the pristine marble lobby. The lobby was packed with other tech professionals returning from their lunch breaks. Marcus strode toward the high-security glass turnstiles, pulling his corporate electronic keycard from his pocket. He slapped the card against the scanner, expecting the glass doors to slide open and grant him access to his empire. A loud, sharp buzz echoed through the lobby. A bright red light flashed on the scanner. "Access denied." Marcus stared at the red light in absolute disbelief. He slapped the card against the scanner again. Buzz. "Access denied." He hit it a third time, slamming his hand down so hard the plastic cracked. Buzz. "Access denied." "Is there a problem here, sir?" a large security guard asked, stepping out from behind the front desk. "My card is not working." Marcus snapped, his voice cracking with pure panic. "I am Marcus, the CEO of Next Gen Solutions on the 30th floor. Let me through immediately." The security guard looked down at his digital tablet and slowly shook his head. "I am sorry, sir, but I have a direct order from the building management company. The lease for the 30th floor went into default at 12 noon today due to a reversed bank payment. Your entire company has been locked out of the premises. Nobody goes up until the outstanding balance is paid in full." "I own this company," Marcus yelled, spit flying from his lips as the surrounding tech workers stopped to watch his public meltdown. "You cannot lock me out of my own business. Do you know who I am?" Before the security guard could respond, a loud, sharp ping sounded from the mobile phone in Marcus' pocket. It was the distinct notification sound he had assigned for high-priority corporate emails. Marcus froze. His breathing was heavy and ragged. He slowly pulled the phone out and looked at the glowing screen. It was an official legal document marked urgent. The subject line read, "Immediate dissolution of funding and equity withdrawal." Marcus opened the email with shaking fingers. The legal jargon filled the screen, outlining the complete and total withdrawal of all private equity, keeping his company alive. The document cited gross financial misconduct, embezzlement, and a direct violation of the executive morality clause as the immediate grounds for termination. The email explicitly stated that the holding company was seizing all remaining physical assets to cover the debt. He had absolutely nothing left. No money, no company, no access, no legacy. He scrolled desperately to the bottom of the long document, his eyes searching for a name. He needed to know who this anonymous backer was. He needed to know who had been pulling the strings for the last 3 years and who had just decided to cut them. He reached the final page. There at the bottom of the digital document was the official signature of the majority shareholder. It was not a faceless corporation. It was not a Silicon Valley holding group. The signature read, Vanguard Apex Capital, Chief Executive Officer Simone. Marcus dropped his phone onto the hard marble floor. The screen shattered into a dozen jagged pieces reflecting the fluorescent lights above. He stood completely paralyzed in the middle of the crowded lobby, gasping for air, as the devastating reality finally crashed down on him. The quiet, supportive wife he had left at home that morning, the woman he had belittled and ordered to straighten her hair, was not just a bored housewife playing with stocks. She was the architect of his entire world, and she had just burned his kingdom to the ground before he even had a chance to eat his lunch. Marcus did not bother picking up his shattered phone from the cold marble floor. He turned around and sprinted right back out the revolving glass doors of his former office building. The midday heat of Atlanta was oppressive, but Marcus was entirely consumed by a cold, blinding panic. He threw himself back into his Porsche, the car that I had secretly paid off, and sped recklessly toward the financial district. His mind was struggling to process the impossible reality that his quiet, submissive wife was actually the absolute ruler of Vanguard Apex Capital. For 7 years he had treated me like a decorative accessory to his grand life. Now he was driving straight into the belly of the beast he never even knew existed. It took him less than 10 minutes to reach my building. He abandoned his car directly in front of the lobby entrance, ignoring the valet entirely. He stormed past the front desk security with the chaotic energy of a desperate man. Because his face was still technically listed as my emergency contact, the junior lobby guards did not immediately tackle him to the floor. He rode the private executive elevator up to the 42nd floor, pacing like a caged animal. When the heavy steel elevator doors slid open, Marcus stepped into the pristine, hushed environment of my firm. The contrast between his frantic, sweaty appearance and the quiet, calculated power of my office was staggering. He ignored the polite greetings of my senior analysts and marched directly toward the glass-walled corner office at the end of the hall. My executive assistant, Elena, stood up from her desk, instantly stepping into his path with her hand raised. She told him very clearly that he could not barge into a secure financial zone without an appointment. Marcus glared at her, his chest heaving with rage. "Get out of my way," he spat, adjusting his expensive suit jacket, trying to regain some fraction of his artificial authority. "I am her husband. I am the chief executive officer of Next Gen Solutions, and I am going to speak to my wife right now." I was sitting comfortably behind my massive mahogany desk, watching this entire pathetic display through the soundproof glass. I pressed the intercom button on my console. "Let him in, Elena," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the outer office speakers. "It is perfectly fine. He is just here to drop off his dignity." Elena stepped aside with a cold, professional smile. Marcus threw open the heavy oak door and slammed it shut behind him, making the glass walls rattle. He stood in the center of my office, breathing heavily, his eyes darting around the expansive room. He took in the sweeping views of the city, the antique furniture, the priceless modern art on the walls, and the sheer, undeniable wealth that surrounded me. For a brief second, I saw genuine intimidation flash across his face. But his narcissistic ego quickly fought its way back to the surface. "What the hell is wrong with you, Simone?" he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation and fury. "Have you completely lost your mind? You froze my accounts. You locked me out of my own building. You embarrassed me in front of the most important venture capitalists in the entire country. Do you have any idea what you have just done? You just destroyed a $10 million deal. I leaned back in my high-backed leather chair and steepled my fingers together. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I just looked at him the way a predator looks at a trapped mouse. I did not destroy anything, Marcus, I said calmly. I simply stopped paying for the illusion. Illusion, he barked, stepping closer to my desk, pointing an accusing finger right at my face. I built that company from nothing. I put my blood, sweat, and tears into next-gen solutions. I am the visionary. I am the founder. You had absolutely no right to interfere with my corporate structure just because you managed to hide some secret investment firm from me. I am going to sue you for everything you have. I will drag you through federal court for corporate sabotage. I actually laughed out loud. The sound was dry and completely devoid of humor. It echoed sharply in the large office. You cannot sue the hand that feeds you, Marcus, I replied, standing up slowly. I walked around the edge of the desk, leaning against the polished wood. Let us get one thing absolutely straight right now. You did not build an empire. You built a financial sinkhole. Your revolutionary software code is a complete disaster. Your user retention rate has been practically non-existent for the last 5 years. You spent your days playing golf, taking lavish lunches, and giving motivational speeches to a team of developers who secretly despised you. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but I raised my hand, silencing him instantly. For 5 entire years, I have been the silent wall standing between you and absolute bankruptcy. I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Every time you lost a major client, I quietly injected capital to cover the deficit. When you insisted on renting that ridiculous premium office space downtown, I was the one who authorized the lease payments through the blind trust. That black Porsche sitting downstairs, I bought it. Those tailored suits you are wearing right now, I paid for them. Your mother begged me to protect your fragile male ego, and like a fool, I bought into the toxic expectation that I needed to carry your dead weight to be a good wife. That is a lie, Marcus stammered, taking a step back as the undeniable truth began to crush his false reality. My company has valuation. My company has intellectual property. Your company is a hollow shell, I fired back. Your intellectual property is worthless, and you have been insolvent since day one. I did not sabotage your life, Marcus. I funded it. And today, at exactly 12 noon, I simply decided that my charity work was officially over. Marcus stared at me. The arrogant tech founder persona was rapidly melting away, leaving behind a small, terrified man. He realized that the legal threats were completely useless. He realized that I held every single card in the deck and I had just flipped the table. Because he was a classic narcissist, he immediately shifted his tactics. He abandoned the aggressive corporate anger and pivoted straight into emotional manipulation. He tried to turn the situation around to make me look like the unstable, irrational one. "This is about last night, is it not?" he said, letting out a breathy, condescending laugh. He ran his hand over his face, shaking his head as if he were dealing with a hysterical child. This entire massive corporate stunt, shutting down my life's work, freezing my bank accounts. You did all of this because I came home late. You did this because you smelled some cheap perfume on my jacket, and your crazy female jealousy took over. He took a step closer, softening his voice, trying to use the charm that had manipulated me for 7 long years. Simone, listen to yourself. You are ruining our lives over a misunderstanding. I was at a networking event. It was crowded. People bump into each other. You are acting like a paranoid lunatic. You are destroying my $10 million legacy because you are insecure about a little bit of cologne. Turn the accounts back on right now before you do permanent damage to our marriage. We can go home tonight, talk about your feelings, and fix this. I stared at him, letting his pathetic gaslighting hang in the silent air of my office. He actually thought he could talk his way out of this by painting me as a jealous, irrational housewife. He thought my financial strike was just an emotional temper tantrum. I did not say a single word. I simply turned around, walked back to my chair, and opened the top drawer of my mahogany desk. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy yellow envelope. I walked back to the front of the desk, holding the envelope right in front of his face. You think this is about cologne? I asked, my voice dropping an octave. You think I dismantled your entire existence over a networking event? I opened the clasp and pulled out a massive stack of glossy high-resolution photographs. I slammed the entire stack down onto the hard wooden desk, scattering the pictures directly in front of him. The first photo showed Marcus walking hand in hand with a young blonde woman into a luxury high-rise building in Midtown Atlanta. The second photo showed him kissing her on the balcony of that exact same building. The third photo was a clear shot of the girl driving a brand new imported convertible. The subsequent photos were accompanied by heavily highlighted financial bank statements and routing numbers. This is not about cologne, Marcus, I said, stepping into his personal space, forcing him to look down at the scattered evidence of his betrayal. This is about the luxury condominium you leased for your 24-year-old mistress using the next-gen corporate expense account. This is about the $80,000 sports car you bought her using the vendor payment system. This is about the diamond tennis bracelet you purchased last week while telling me your company was just a little tight on liquid assets. Marcus looked down at the photos and the color completely drained from his face. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The physical proof of his embezzlement and his infidelity was staring him right in the eyes. You did not just cheat on your wife, Marcus, I whispered, leaning in so close he could feel the coldness of my breath. You committed massive corporate fraud using my money. You stole from Vanguard Apex Capital. And in my world, we do not go to couples therapy to talk about our feelings when someone steals from us. In my world, we take absolutely everything you have and we leave you with nothing but the clothes on your back. Marcus stood frozen in the center of my office, surrounded by the silent, towering glass walls of my empire. He finally understood that he was not talking to his submissive wife anymore. He was staring directly at his executioner. I left Marcus standing entirely motionless in the glass cage of my office and instructed my security team to escort him out of the building. I did not wait around to watch him leave. I simply packed up my briefcase, took the private elevator down to the garage, and drove myself back to the penthouse. The Atlanta skyline was painted in deep shades of bruised purple and burning orange as the sun began to set. When I walked through the front door, the silence of the massive apartment was incredibly peaceful. I knew it was only a temporary peace. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a generous glass of expensive red wine, and sat down on the velvet living room sofa. I did not turn on the television. I just sat in the dim lighting, waiting for the inevitable explosion. It took exactly 3 hours. At 8 o'clock sharp, the heavy oak front door practically shook on its hinges from the violent pounding. Marcus did not have his keys because I had already instructed the building concierge to confiscate them. I took a slow sip of my wine, set the glass down on the marble coffee table, and walked over to the door. I pulled it open, and before I could even say a single word, my mother-in-law, Brenda, pushed her way inside. Brenda was a towering, imposing woman who believed her age and her title as the family matriarch gave her absolute authority over everyone in her bloodline. She was wearing a structured church suit complete with a matching hat, carrying a large designer handbag that Marcus had undoubtedly purchased for her using my money. Right behind her was Jamal. He was Marcus' older brother, a man who possessed all of Marcus' arrogant tendencies, but absolutely none of his drive. Jamal was built like a linebacker, and he immediately crossed his arms, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me in my own foyer. "What in the name of God is wrong with you, Simone?" Brenda shouted, her voice echoing harshly off the high ceilings. She did not even take off her coat. She marched right into the center of my living room, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. "My son called me in tears. He told me you locked him out of his own business and froze all his bank accounts. He said you humiliated him in front of Silicon Valley investors. Have you completely lost your mind?" I closed the front door slowly, making sure the deadbolt clicked into place. I did not raise my voice to match hers. I walked calmly back to the sofa and picked up my wine glass. "I froze the accounts because the money belongs to me, Brenda," I said, taking a deliberate sip. "Your son has been using my private equity firm as his personal piggy bank for 3 years. And yesterday I found out he has been using those corporate funds to finance a luxury lifestyle for his 24-year-old mistress. I expected Brenda to show at least a fraction of shock or disappointment at the mention of the mistress. I expected her to perhaps lower her voice and ask for an explanation. Instead, she waved her hand in the air, completely dismissing my words as if I had just complained about Marcus leaving a wet towel on the bathroom floor. Is that what this is about? Brenda scoffed, rolling her eyes toward the ceiling. You are tearing apart our entire family and destroying a successful black man over some young girl. Simone, I raised you better than this. No, I did not raise you, but I thought I taught you how this world works. Men make mistakes. Men have weaknesses of the flesh. That does not give you the right to publicly castrate him and steal his life work. His life work, I repeated, my voice turning dangerously cold. His life work is a failing startup that has not turned a single dollar of profit since the day it opened. I funded it. I kept him afloat because you begged me to save him from bankruptcy. That is what a wife is supposed to do. Brenda snapped, stepping closer to me. Her eyes were burning with a toxic, righteous fury. As strong black women, we have to be forgiving to uplift our men. We are the backbone of the community, Simone. When the world tries to tear our men down, we are supposed to be their sanctuary. We are supposed to hold them up, not throw them to the wolves just because our feelings get a little hurt. You are acting like a bitter, spiteful woman. You are acting like those miserable, lonely women who would rather see a man destroyed than share him. I stared at Brenda, completely sickened by her twisted logic. She was standing in the penthouse that I bought, defending the son who stole from me, and she was trying to weaponize my race and my gender to make me submit to his abuse. She was trying to gaslight me into believing that my financial independence and my self-respect were somehow a betrayal to my culture. Holding a man up does not mean letting him empty my bank accounts to buy sports cars for a blonde child, Brenda. I replied, my tone completely flat. And I am not throwing him to the wolves. I am the wolf. That is exactly your problem, Jamal chimed in, stepping out from the shadows of the hallway. His voice was loud and aggressive. You always thought you were better than us. You always walked around here with your nose in the air, hiding your money, making Marcus feel like less of a man. You drove him to find comfort somewhere else, Simone. A man needs to feel respected in his own home. If you were acting like a real wife, he would not have needed to step out. I slowly turned my head to look at Jamal. The sheer hypocrisy radiating from him was almost suffocating. Jamal, I suggest you lower your voice before I decide to audit your life as well, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a razor blade. You want to talk about respect. You want to talk about acting like a real man. How about the fact that my blind trust paid your mortgage for the last 6 months because you lost your job again? How about the $50,000 loan Marcus gave you to start that ridiculous trucking company that went bankrupt in 4 weeks? That was my money, Jamal. Every single meal you ate, every roof over your head was paid for by the bitter, spiteful woman standing right in front of you. Jamal opened his mouth but quickly snapped it shut. His chest deflated and he took a subtle step backward. He looked at his mother for backup, but Brenda was already winding up for another theatrical attack. You think money gives you the right to disrespect this family? Brenda screamed, clutching the pearls at her neck. You think because you have a fancy office downtown you can treat my son like garbage. You are nothing without this family, Simone. You hear me? You are a cold, calculated snake, and God is going to punish you for what you are doing to my boy. You are going to fix his accounts tomorrow morning, or I swear to God I will ruin your reputation in this city. I will tell everyone what kind of vindictive, unstable woman you really are. The argument was reaching an absolute boiling point. Brenda was practically vibrating with rage, spit flying from her lips as she hurled insults at me. Jamal was pacing the floor, muttering curses under his breath, trying to recover his bruised ego. The noise in the penthouse was deafening. The toxic, demanding energy of Marcus' family was filling every single corner of my sanctuary. I was just about to press the panic button under my coffee table to summon the building security and have them both physically dragged out into the street. But before I could reach under the table, the heavy front door, which Brenda had left completely unlocked, swung open again. The loud screaming immediately stopped. Brenda froze mid-sentence. Jamal turned around, his fists still clenched at his sides. I looked past them toward the foyer. Stepping into the tense, chaotic room was Chloe. She was Jamal's wife and Marcus' white sister-in-law. She was dressed in a soft beige cashmere sweater and tailored linen pants, looking like she had just stepped out of a luxury wellness retreat. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled in effortless waves, and she carried an aura of intense, unearned privilege. She looked completely out of place in the middle of this vicious family war. Chloe walked slowly into the living room, her expensive leather flats making absolutely no sound on the hardwood floor. She took one look at Brenda glaring at me, Jamal breathing heavily, and me sitting calmly with my wine glass. She let out a soft, exaggerated sigh of sympathy. She held both of her hands up in the air, palms facing outward in a ridiculous, calming gesture, as if she were a trained hostage negotiator stepping into a crisis zone to play the ultimate peacemaker. "Let us all just take a collective deep breath," Chloe said, her voice dripping with that manufactured yoga instructor calmness. She lowered her hands and glided over to the armchair across from my sofa, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. Brenda and Jamal immediately fed off her energy. Brenda huffed loudly, dropping her heavy designer bag onto the floor and crossing her arms. Jamal nodded, leaning against the wall like a bouncer who had just been validated by management. The two of them had spent the last 20 minutes screaming at me, but the moment Chloe stepped into the room, they gladly handed her the reins. She was the wealthy, well-connected white daughter-in-law, and in Brenda's twisted family hierarchy, Chloe's opinion held an absurd amount of weight. Chloe looked at me with what she probably thought was a deeply empathetic gaze. Her brow was furrowed in mock concern. "Simone, I know you are hurting right now." She began tilting her head to the side. "I hear your pain, and I want to completely validate your feelings. Finding out your husband might have strayed is incredibly triggering. It brings up a lot of deep-seated insecurities. But we have to look at the bigger picture here. We have to hold space for nuance." Nuance. I took another slow sip of my red wine, letting the word roll around in my mind. The sheer audacity of this woman walking into my home and using therapy buzzwords to defend the man who stole millions of dollars from me was almost fascinating to watch. "Marcus is under a tremendous amount of pressure," Chloe continued, leaning forward, resting her elbows on her knees, as if we were having an intimate fireside chat. "As a successful Black man in America, society is constantly trying to tear him down. You know that better than anyone, Simone. You are supposed to be his safe harbor. You are supposed to be his peace. Instead, you are reacting from a place of unhealed trauma. Shutting down his business and freezing his bank accounts is not setting a healthy boundary. It is textbook financial abuse." I did not blink. I did not interrupt her. I simply let her keep digging her own grave. "You are financially abusing him because you are insecure about a temporary lapse in judgment," Chloe said, her voice growing slightly more firm, as she fully committed to her role as the moral compass of our family. "He is 35 years old, Simone. He is going through a classic midlife crisis. The pressure of providing, the pressure of living up to the family expectations, it simply broke him for a moment. He sought validation outside the marriage. Is it right? No, of course not. But is it worth destroying his entire legacy over? Absolutely not." Brenda nodded vigorously, her church hat bobbing up and down in enthusiastic agreement. "That is exactly right, Chloe. You tell her the truth. She is acting out of pure spite. She has always been jealous of my boy." Chloe smiled softly at Brenda, accepting the praise before turning her patronizing gaze back to me. "You are emasculating him, Simone. You are using your wealth as a weapon to punish him for a very human mistake. Marriage is about grace. It is about understanding the gray areas and navigating them with love. You cannot view this situation in black and white. He loves you. He built that tech company for your future together, and you took it away in a fit of jealousy. That is incredibly toxic behavior. If you truly love him, you will call your bank right now, restore his access, and agree to go to couples counseling. We can all heal from this if you just drop your defensive walls and do the emotional work. The room fell completely silent. Chloe sat back in her chair, smoothing out the fabric of her linen pants, looking incredibly pleased with herself. She genuinely believed she had just delivered a profound emotional breakthrough. She thought she had effectively shamed me into submission, using the vocabulary of modern wellness culture. Jamal was smirking confidently from the hallway, and Brenda was staring at me, waiting for me to break down in tears and apologize for my supposed financial abuse. They all thought they had me cornered. They thought the combined weight of their guilt trips and psychological manipulation would force me to surrender my power. I looked at Chloe. I looked at her expensive cashmere sweater, her perfect blonde hair, and her condescending smile. She had absolutely no idea what she had just walked into. She had no idea that the young girl Marcus was spending my money on was her own biological sister, Sarah. She was sitting in my living room lecturing me about grace and nuance while her little sister was driving a sports car bought with my embezzled corporate funds. She was defending the very man who was sleeping with her own flesh and blood. I slowly set my wine glass down on the marble coffee table. The soft clink of the crystal against the stone echoed loudly in the quiet room. I did not scream at her. I did not defend my actions. I did not bother explaining to Chloe that protecting my own corporate assets from a fraudulent thief was not financial abuse, but standard legal protocol. I simply reached across the table and picked up the sleek black television remote. "You are right, Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely steady. "Marriage is absolutely full of gray areas. And you are right about Marcus, too. He is under a lot of pressure and he definitely needs nuance. Let us see exactly how nuanced he is." I pointed the sleek remote at the massive 85-inch flat-screen television mounted directly above the marble fireplace. I pressed a single button. The screen flickered to life, instantly casting a harsh, bright light over the dim living room. The high-definition video began to play in total silence. It was security footage that my private investigator had pulled directly from the lobby cameras of the luxury Midtown condominium. The timestamp in the corner read exactly 3 days ago. On the massive screen, the heavy glass doors of the building slid open. Marcus walked into the frame. He was wearing the exact same navy bespoke suit he had worn to my mother's birthday dinner last week. He was smiling that bright, arrogant smile he reserved only for people he wanted to impress. But he was not alone. He was tightly holding the hand of a young petite blonde woman. The room went completely dead silent. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning unit. Brenda stopped breathing. Jamal stood frozen against the wall. Chloe leaned forward slightly, her perfect posture stiffening. She narrowed her eyes at the screen, trying to make sense of the image. On the television, Marcus pulled the blonde woman close to him. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pinning her against the marble wall of the lobby. He buried his face in her neck, and she laughed, tilting her head back. Then she turned her face perfectly toward the security camera. The high-resolution lens captured her features with absolute, undeniable clarity. It captured her bright blue eyes, her sharp cheekbones, and the distinct custom emerald necklace she was wearing. I did not even have to look at the screen. I was watching Chloe. I watched the exact second her brain registered what she was seeing. I watched the blood completely drain from her face, leaving her skin ashen and pale. The condescending, empathetic smile melted off her lips. Her mouth fell open in a silent scream of absolute horror. She recognized the emerald necklace because she was the one who had bought it for her 24-year-old biological sister last Christmas. "That is Sarah," Chloe whispered. Her voice was trembling so violently it sounded like she was choking. "That is my baby sister." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The video continued to play, showing Marcus passionately kissing Sarah, pulling her toward the private elevators. The fake wellness instructor persona that Chloe had worn like a shield evaporated into thin air. the woman who had just lectured me about grace forgiveness and the gray areas of marriage, completely snapped. She let out a guttural, piercing scream that sounded like a wounded animal. She leaped out of the armchair with such explosive force that the heavy piece of furniture tipped over backward and crashed onto the hardwood floor. She did not go after the television. She turned around and lunged straight toward the hallway where Marcus had been silently listening to the argument. Marcus had stepped out of the shadows thinking he was safe because his family was defending him. He was completely unprepared for the feral woman flying toward him. Chloe slammed into his chest, her manicured hands turning into absolute claws. She slapped him across the face with a sickening crack that echoed through the entire penthouse. She did not stop there. She grabbed fistfuls of his expensive tailored shirt, ripping the fabric. She clawed at his neck, leaving deep, bloody scratches down his throat. "You disgusting pig!" Chloe shrieked, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "That is my sister. She is a child. You slept with my baby sister, you absolute monster. I will kill you. I will actually kill you." Marcus stumbled backward, raising his arms to protect his face, terrified by the sheer violence of her attack. "Chloe, get off me!" he yelled, trying to push her away, but she was completely unhinged. She kicked him in the shins and swung her fists, wildly connecting with his jaw. Jamal, who had been standing paralyzed in the corner, finally snapped out of his shock. His brother was sleeping with his wife's younger sister. The ultimate betrayal had just nuked his own marriage and his own family. Jamal let out a roar of anger, but he did not attack Marcus. He rushed forward and grabbed his wife around the waist, physically dragging her off his brother. Chloe kicked and thrashed, screaming obscenities that I had never heard a wealthy suburban housewife use before. Brenda, the proud matriarch who had just sworn God would punish me for my actions, could not handle the reality of her golden boy's sins. She clutched her chest, her eyes rolling back slightly. She collapsed onto the sofa, gasping for air, dramatically fanning herself with her hand. Her perfect church hat fell onto the floor, completely forgotten. "My baby!" She wailed, practically fainting from the absolute shame of the situation. "My boy. Lord, have mercy on this house." I sat calmly on my sofa, watching the complete and utter destruction of the family that had tried to break me. I picked up the television remote and pressed the power button. The massive screen went black, plunging the room back into dim lighting. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my red wine. "There is your nuance, Chloe," I said, my voice cutting through the chaotic screaming. "I hope you can find it in your heart to hold space for his midlife crisis at the next family Thanksgiving." Chloe stopped fighting against her husband's grip. She went completely limp, sobbing uncontrollably into Jamal's chest. Jamal looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of profound embarrassment and deep unspoken apology. He finally realized that everything I had said was true. Marcus was not a victim. Marcus was a parasite who had just infected everyone he touched. "Get out," I said, setting my wine glass down. My voice was no longer a polite suggestion. It was a firm, non-negotiable command. "All of you, get out of my penthouse right now before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing and assault." Jamal did not argue. He practically carried his sobbing wife toward the front door. Brenda miraculously recovered from her fainting spell the moment the threat of police was mentioned. She scrambled to her feet, grabbed her designer handbag, and hurried out the door without looking back. She could not look me in the eyes. Her entire moral high ground had been burned to ashes. Marcus was the last one left standing in my foyer. His custom suit was torn. His expensive tie was ripped off. Deep red scratches covered his neck, and blood was slowly trickling down his collar. He looked absolutely pathetic, but because he was a true narcissist, he simply could not accept total defeat. Even as his world was collapsing, even as his own family fled from him in disgust, his ego desperately searched for one final weapon to use against me. He stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. He wiped the blood from his neck and glared at me with pure, venomous hatred. "You think you won, Simone?" He growled, his voice trembling with rage. You think you can just kick me out into the street and take everything I have? You can freeze my accounts, but you cannot touch this. This penthouse. This multi-million-dollar property. This house is in my name. I looked at Marcus standing in my foyer, clinging to a piece of paper like a drowning man holding onto a broken piece of wood. You are absolutely right, Marcus, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. The deed to this penthouse is in your name. I bought this property in cash 3 years ago, and I put it in your name because your incredibly fragile ego could not handle living in a luxury home owned by your wife. I bought you the illusion of being the provider, but that does not change the fact that you are leaving tonight. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the front desk. Within 5 minutes, 2 burly building security guards arrived and physically escorted a bleeding, frantic Marcus out of the private elevator lobby. I locked the deadbolt behind him, turned off the lights, and went to sleep. I slept more peacefully that night than I had in 7 entire years. The peace, however, was aggressively short-lived. At exactly 7 o'clock the next morning, a loud, heavy pounding echoed through the penthouse. It was not the frantic knocking of a desperate husband. It was the sharp, authoritative knock of law enforcement. I tightened the belt of my silk robe, walked to the front door, and checked the security monitor. 2 uniformed Atlanta police officers were standing in the hallway looking incredibly stern. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. "Are you?" Simone, the taller officer, asked, resting his hand casually near his utility belt. "Yes, I am," I replied, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my voice entirely calm. "How can I help you, officers?" The officer reached into his heavy black binder and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stapled together. He handed the packet to me with a look of practiced detachment. You are being served with an emergency ex parte temporary restraining order. You are legally required to vacate these premises immediately. You are not permitted to come within 500 feet of your husband Marcus or this primary residence until a formal court hearing is held. I looked down at the paperwork in my hands. The front page bore the official seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. I did not scream. I did not argue with the officers. I am a wealthy, intelligent Black woman in America, and I know exactly how the legal system works. Arguing with armed police officers in the hallway of a luxury building is a fight you will never win. Instead, I slowly opened the packet and scanned the first few pages. Marcus had not wasted a single second after being thrown out last night. He had somehow found a dirty bottom-feeding lawyer who specialized in exploiting domestic violence loopholes to force immediate property control. Marcus had filed a sworn affidavit claiming that I was an unstable, violent abuser. He submitted high-resolution photographs of his neck and chest, showing the deep, bloody scratches and bruises that Chloe had inflicted on him just a few hours prior. But in his official police report, he completely erased Chloe from the narrative. He told the emergency judge that I was the one who viciously attacked him in a jealous rage. Because the penthouse was legally deeded in his name, and because he presented documented physical injuries, the judge granted him exclusive temporary occupancy of the property. He was using the legal system to steal my home and paint me as a domestic terrorist. "I understand the parameters of this order, officer," I said, looking back up at the policeman. "My husband is lying, and these injuries were caused by his sister-in-law. However, I will not make your job difficult today. I just need 15 minutes to pack an overnight bag and gather my personal medications." The officers exchanged a surprised glance, clearly expecting a hysterical meltdown. The taller officer nodded. "We will wait right here by the door, ma'am. Please be quick." I turned around and walked down the long hallway toward the master bedroom. The air in the apartment suddenly felt cold and foreign. Marcus had actually outsmarted me for a brief moment. He knew he could not beat me in a financial battle, so he dragged me into a dirty legal street fight. He knew the optics of a domestic violence charge would temporarily paralyze my ability to maneuver freely. I walked into my massive custom walk-in closet and pulled down a black leather designer duffel bag. I methodically packed 3 tailored business suits, several silk blouses, a pair of expensive heels, and my luxury skincare routine. I was being evicted from my own multi-million-dollar property, but I was absolutely not going to look like a victim while doing it. I grabbed my laptop, my encrypted backup drives, and my passport. As I zipped the heavy leather bag shut, I sat down on the edge of the plush king-sized bed. I picked up the restraining order packet again. My mind was racing, analyzing every single angle of Marcus' attack. Securing an emergency restraining order in the middle of the night requires more than just a few scratches and a sad story. Judges are inherently skeptical of midnight filings unless there is substantial corroborating evidence or a credible third-party witness who can swear under penalty of perjury that the victim is in imminent mortal danger. I flipped past Marcus' ridiculous handwritten statement and the glossy photos of his neck. I arrived at the supporting documentation section. There was a signed sworn affidavit attached to the back of the file. It was a character witness statement designed to establish a long-documented history of my supposedly erratic and violent behavior. I read the opening paragraph. The witness claimed they had worked closely with me for several years. They swore under oath that I frequently threw heavy objects around my office, that I subjected my husband to severe financial and emotional abuse, and that I had explicitly threatened to murder Marcus on multiple occasions. The statement was a masterpiece of character assassination. It painted me as a ruthless, unhinged tyrant who was completely out of control. I skipped to the bottom of the final page to see the signature. I needed to know what sleazy friend Marcus had bribed to commit perjury on a federal court document. I needed to know who I was going to destroy next. My eyes locked onto the elegant cursive signature printed in blue ink. My breath caught in my throat. The heavy legal packet slipped slightly in my hands. The signature did not belong to Jamal. It did not belong to Brenda. It did not belong to any of Marcus' desperate tech friends. The signature belonged to Elena. Elena was my executive assistant. She had managed my schedule, answered my private phone lines, and organized my entire corporate life for the last 4 years. I paid her a massive 6-figure salary. I paid for her premium health care. I even bought her a vintage Rolex watch for her birthday last year. She was the woman who had poured my dark roast coffee just yesterday morning and smiled at me while I initiated the financial destruction of my husband. I stared at her signature, and the true scale of Marcus' betrayal finally washed over me. He had not just cheated on me with his sister-in-law. He had completely infiltrated my empire. He had somehow gotten to Elena. He had bought her loyalty, poisoned her against me, or blackmailed her into becoming his ultimate weapon. She knew my schedule. She knew my banking access codes. She knew the names of every single judge and politician I held influence over. And now she was the key witness testifying against me in a court of law. Ma M. The police officer called out from the hallway, his voice echoing toward the bedroom. "We need you to vacate the premises right now." I closed the legal packet and shoved it into my designer bag. I stood up from the edge of the bed, smoothing down the fabric of my silk dress. The initial shock of the betrayal evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, calculating fury. Marcus thought he had backed me into a corner by stealing my home and turning my most trusted employee against me. He thought he had left me entirely defenseless. I walked out of the master bedroom, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I slung the heavy leather bag over my shoulder and walked right past the 2 police officers without saying another word. I stepped out of the penthouse and listened to the heavy oak door slam shut behind me, locking me out of my own castle. I rode the elevator down to the lobby and stepped out into the bright Atlanta morning. I did not shed a single tear. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a private number that I had not used in over 3 years. Marcus wanted to play dirty. Marcus wanted to use my own employees to stab me in the back. That was perfectly fine. I was about to show him what a real criminal enterprise looked like. I instructed my private security driver to take me directly to the St. Regis Hotel in Buckhead. I walked up to the marble concierge desk and booked their largest presidential suite for the next 6 months, paying entirely in advance. I was not a desperate wife fleeing a broken marriage. I was a general relocating my command center. I spent the next 48 hours completely ignoring the outside world. I did not check my text messages. I did not respond to the frantic emails from my corporate board regarding the restraining order. I sat on the plush velvet sofa of my hotel suite, drinking sparkling water, and meticulously finalizing my ultimate counterattack. Marcus, on the other hand, could not endure a single hour of silence. Because his fragile ego required constant public validation, he did not just quietly occupy my penthouse. He needed an audience to witness his stolen victory. By Friday evening, he had transformed my elegant home into a chaotic nightclub. He invited over 50 of his closest associates, his former fraternity brothers, his failed tech buddies, and a swarm of shallow social climbers to a massive celebration. He wanted to show the city of Atlanta that he had successfully conquered the wealthy dragon and claimed her castle. And of course, he immediately moved Sarah in. I did not have to hire a private investigator to know what was happening inside my own home. I simply opened my social media applications. Marcus and his parasitic friends were broadcasting every single second of their pathetic victory lap to the entire internet. I watched a high-definition video of Sarah Chloe, 24-year-old biological sister, strutting through my custom chef kitchen. The sheer audacity of this young woman was almost breathtaking. She was actually wearing one of my expensive silk robes, holding a crystal champagne flute that I had imported from Italy, laughing loudly at a joke Marcus had just made. Marcus had somehow managed to cater the party with expensive seafood and premium liquor. Since I had permanently frozen all of his legitimate banking access and slashed his credit lines to zero, I knew exactly where that party money had come from. He had dipped into his hidden offshore crypto wallets. He was actively spending the dirty money he had laundered through my corporate accounts. He was literally drinking the evidence that was going to send him to federal prison. The most sickening part of the entire spectacle was not Marcus or his young mistress. It was Brenda. My mother-in-law was right there at the party, standing on the outdoor terrace overlooking the city skyline, holding a glass of Prosecco and posing for pictures. Her golden boy had just violently destroyed his marriage, slept with his sister-in-law, and filed a fraudulent police report. But Brenda was smiling like a proud mother at a graduation ceremony. I watched a live video posted by one of Marcus' friends that captured the toxic family dynamic in real time. Chloe had actually shown up to the lobby of the penthouse building earlier that night. She was crying hysterically, demanding that the concierge let her upstairs so she could physically drag her younger sister out of that apartment. When the security guards refused, Chloe started screaming in the lobby, calling Marcus a predator and Sarah a homewrecker. Instead of Marcus coming down to face the chaos, Brenda took the elevator down to the lobby to confront Chloe. The video captured Brenda standing tall and imposing, completely blocking the elevator banks. She pointed a harsh finger right at Chloe, face telling her to stop causing a scene and embarrassing their family. "You will not ruin my son night, Chloe," Brenda scolded, her voice dripping with venom. "He has been through absolute hell this week with that bitter, vindictive wife of his. He finally has his home back and he is trying to find some peace. Sarah is a grown woman and she is making her own choices. If you cannot support your brother-in-law, you need to leave right now before I have you arrested for trespassing." Brenda was so completely blinded by her toxic favoritism that she was actively protecting the man who had ripped her other son's marriage apart. She forbade Chloe from trash-talking Marcus, validating his narcissistic behavior just to maintain the illusion that her son was a king. Chloe was left sobbing uncontrollably on the sidewalk, while Brenda rode the elevator back up to the penthouse to drink champagne with the mistress. As the night dragged on, the party grew wilder, and the social media posts became incredibly reckless. Around midnight, Marcus decided it was time to address his audience directly. He went live on his primary account to thousands of followers. He was visibly intoxicated, his designer shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, sweating profusely under the bright lights of the kitchen. Sarah was draped heavily over his shoulder, giggling into his neck. Marcus held his glass up to the camera, his eyes glazed, but filled with a dark, vindictive energy. I want to make a toast to everyone out there who has ever had somebody try to hold them down, he slurred, leaning into the phone screen. They will try to control you. They will try to use their money to keep you in a cage. They will freeze your accounts and try to lock you out of your own business. But a real boss never folds. You can attack my bank, but you can never stop the vision. We are living in the penthouse, baby. The wicked witch is officially dead, and the king is back on his throne. He laughed loudly, a harsh grating sound, and kissed Sarah right on the mouth for the entire world to see. He was publicly mocking my downfall, completely convinced that his dirty legal maneuver had rendered me powerless. He thought he had won the war. I turned off my phone screen, cutting off his arrogant voice. The silence of my hotel suite rushed back in. I did not throw my phone across the room. I did not shed a single tear of frustration. I stood up from the sofa and walked down to the exclusive luxury lobby of the St. Regis. The lobby was beautifully dimly lit, playing soft jazz music with a few high-profile guests, speaking in hushed tones over expensive cocktails. It was the perfect environment for absolute clarity. I sat down in a plush leather wingback chair in the darkest corner of the lounge. I reached into the pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was a military-grade encrypted USB drive. It contained every single digital ledger, every hidden IP address, and every fraudulent transaction log, proving that Marcus had laundered $10 million of illegal cryptocurrency through the Next Gen Solutions payroll system. It also contained undeniable proof that my assistant Elena had accepted a $50,000 wire transfer from that exact same dirty account just 2 days before she signed that fake police affidavit against me. I twirled the small metal drive between my manicured fingers, feeling the cool weight of his total destruction resting in the palm of my hand. Marcus wanted to play the role of the untouchable king. He wanted to use the local police to force me out of my home. It was finally time to elevate the playing field. I pulled out my secure phone and dialed a direct line to the white-collar crime division of the federal government. A contact I had established years ago during a massive corporate merger answered on the second ring. "Good evening, Agent Miller," I said, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. "I have a massive corporate fraud and money laundering case ready for immediate handover. It involves stolen crypto assets, forged legal affidavits, and a flight risk suspect who is currently live streaming his location to the public. It is time to notify the FBI." 3 days after my phone call to the federal authorities, I walked into the sterile glass-enclosed conference room of a neutral mediation firm located in the heart of downtown Atlanta. The air conditioning in the room was turned up so high, it felt like a meat locker. I took my seat at the long mahogany table. My lead corporate attorney, Richard, sat directly to my left. I had briefed Richard on every single detail of my ultimate plan. He knew exactly what the end game was, and he was fully prepared to play his part in the theater we were about to orchestrate. 10 minutes later, the heavy glass door swung open. Marcus strutted into the room, followed closely by his attorney. The lawyer was a notoriously sleazy operator named Gregory, who specialized in aggressive men's rights cases and blackmail tactics, disguised as legal strategy. Marcus looked like a man who had just conquered a small country. He was wearing a brand-new charcoal gray designer suit, a silk tie, and a smug, arrogant smile that made my stomach turn. He sat down directly across from me, leaning back in his leather chair and crossing his arms over his chest. He did not look like a man who was secretly under federal investigation. He looked like a man who believed he had successfully cornered a billionaire. The court-appointed mediator, an older woman with tired eyes, sat at the head of the table and opened her file. She explained that this emergency session was scheduled to address the temporary restraining order, the frozen corporate assets, and the immediate separation of our shared property. Before she could even finish her introductory remarks, Gregory slapped his hands down on the table and took complete control of the room. "My client is willing to be incredibly generous today," Gregory began, his voice dripping with condescension. He looked at me as if I were a stain on the carpet. "Despite the fact that your client violently attacked my client in his own home and then engaged in a malicious campaign of financial sabotage, we are offering a clean settlement." We want to avoid dragging this family tragedy through a public trial. Richard crossed his arms and looked at Gregory. What exactly is your definition of a clean settlement, Gregory? Gregory pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase and slid them across the polished mahogany table. It is very simple, Richard. Simone will immediately sign a full and unconditional transfer of Vanguard Apex Capital's entire 70% equity stake in Next Gen Solutions. She will legally surrender all voting rights, all financial claims, and all intellectual property associated with the startup. Furthermore, she will sign a waiver granting Marcus 100% absolute legal and financial ownership of the company, effective immediately. I looked down at the documents. It was exactly what I wanted. I needed him to take absolute full liability for the company before the federal agents kicked his door in. But I could not let him know that. I had to make him fight for it. And what exactly does Simone get in return for handing over a company she funded? Richard asked, keeping his tone perfectly skeptical and defensive. She gets to stay out of a jail cell, Marcus interrupted, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the table. He looked directly into my eyes, his gaze filled with a toxic, vindictive triumph. If you sign that paper, Simone, I will call the judge and drop the domestic violence restraining order. I will tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will let you move back into the penthouse and I will sign a post-nuptial agreement allowing you to keep your little Vanguard investment firm untouched. If you do not sign it, I will have Gregory file criminal charges against you for financial abuse and domestic battery. I will take half of your firm in the divorce and I will make sure you spend the next 5 years fighting me in court while your reputation is dragged through the mud. You are blackmailing her, Richard stated flatly. We are offering her a lifeline, Gregory corrected with a sickening smirk. Your client is a hysterical, bitter woman who could not handle the fact that her husband was building a massive legacy that overshadowed her own. She lashed out. We have the hospital records. We have the sworn affidavit from her own executive assistant, Elena, proving her erratic and violent history. We hold all the cards, Richard. Tell your client to sign the transfer, or we go to the press tomorrow morning. The sheer audacity of their strategy was breathtaking. They were using a fake police report, a perjured witness statement from my traitorous assistant, and the threat of public humiliation to extort a multi-million-dollar corporate transfer. Marcus was so blinded by his own narcissism that he actually believed he had outsmarted a woman who manipulated global markets for a living. He thought he was forcing me to surrender my greatest asset to save my personal freedom. He had absolutely no idea that he was begging me to hand him a ticking time bomb. I sat silently listening to them verbally tear me apart. Marcus took absolute delight in humiliating me across the table. He called me cold. He called me unlovable. He told the mediator that I had always been jealous of his natural charisma and his ability to connect with Silicon Valley investors. He said he was doing me a massive favor by taking Next Gen Solutions entirely off my hands because a woman with my emotional instability was clearly unfit to manage real corporate risk. Every single insult he threw at me was a calculated attempt to break my spirit. He wanted to see me crumble. He wanted to look at the woman who had quietly funded his entire existence and watch her shatter under the weight of his false superiority. I knew I had to give him exactly the performance he was waiting for. I lowered my head slightly, staring down at the thick legal contracts sitting in front of me. I slowed my breathing and forced my chest to heave as if I were struggling to hold back a massive wave of panic. I thought about the sheer betrayal of my assistant Elena. I thought about the disgusting image of my mother-in-law Brenda protecting the man who was sleeping with his own sister-in-law. I channeled all of that genuine disgust and forced it upward into my eyes. A single tear slipped down my cheek, splashing silently onto the polished wooden table. Simone, Richard whispered, playing his role perfectly. He placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. You do not have to do this right now. We can fight this in court. We can fight the affidavit. I shook my head slowly, letting my hair fall forward to cover the sides of my face. No, I whispered, my voice deliberately cracking. I cannot do a public trial, Richard. I cannot let my investors see those fake police reports. He will ruin my firm. He will take everything I have built. I reached out and placed my hand on the heavy gold pen resting next to the contract. I forced my fingers to tremble. I made my hand shake so violently that the pen tapped lightly against the mahogany wood. I let out a soft, pathetic sob, acting completely shattered. I looked like a woman who had just realized she had lost the war. I looked like a broken, defeated wife who was finally submitting to the overwhelming power of her husband. Across the table, Marcus leaned back in his leather chair. He watched my shaking hands and listened to my quiet sobs. A slow, dark, and absolutely triumphant smile spread across his face. "Are you finally ready to admit total defeat?" Simone Marcus asked, his voice thick with unearned victory. He leaned across the polished mahogany table and tapped his index finger directly on the signature line of the heavy legal contract. "Sign the paper. Give me back my company and I will generously let you walk out of here without a criminal record. I might even let you keep that fancy little office of yours downtown so you can pretend to be a real executive." Gregory, the sleazy attorney, chuckled darkly. He slid the heavy gold pen across the table until it rested right against my trembling hand. He reminded me that his incredibly generous offer expired the very second I stood up from the chair. He told me that if I did not sign immediately, he already had the police dispatch number typed into his phone, ready to report my supposed violation of the restraining order. He promised me that he would have me dragged out of the building in handcuffs right in front of all the other corporate lawyers. Richard, my attorney, played his part flawlessly. He slammed his hand down on the table and looked at me with fake desperation. "Simone, you absolutely cannot do this," he pleaded, his voice loud and urgent in the quiet conference room. "If you sign this transfer, you are giving up every single financial claim to Next Gen Solutions. But more importantly, you are signing away your right to hold him accountable for any corporate mismanagement. The indemnification clause Gregory added is absolute ironclad. It legally severs you and Vanguard Apex Capital from the startup completely." Marcus laughed out loud, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the glass walls. "That is the entire point, Richard," he sneered. "I want her completely severed from my legacy. I want her name scrubbed from my corporate history. I am tired of her holding me back with her conservative investing mindset. I am taking this company to the moon, and she does not get to ride my coattails anymore." I kept my head bowed, refusing to look him in the eye. I picked up the heavy gold pen. The cold metal felt grounding against my skin, keeping my pulse perfectly steady. I took a deep, shaky breath and slowly signed my name on the bottom of the first page. I flipped the heavy parchment and signed the second page. I signed the third page, transferring my massive 70% equity stake entirely back into the hands of the man who had stolen from me. I pushed the stack of papers across the table, my hands still performing a perfect theatrical tremble. Gregory snatched them up immediately, his eyes scanning my signatures like a hawk to ensure they were legally binding. He nodded to Marcus, handing the stack of documents over to him. "Now it is your turn, Marcus," Gregory said, pointing to the final page. "By signing this master assumption of liability agreement, you are formally accepting 100% of the equity. But you are also accepting 100% of all financial, legal, and operational liabilities associated with Next Gen Solutions from its inception to the present day. You will be the sole owner and the sole responsible party. There is no going back after this." Marcus did not even bother reading the fine print. His eyes were completely glazed over with greed and arrogance. He saw only the imaginary valuation of his failing tech startup. He saw only the massive Series A funding round that he still foolishly believed he could salvage once my financial freeze was finally lifted. He was so blinded by his desire to humiliate me that he completely ignored the basic rules of corporate acquisition. You never assume total liability without a forensic audit. He picked up his own expensive fountain pen. He looked at me one last time, his expression filled with absolute contempt. "You really thought you could destroy me?" he whispered, his voice dripping with malice. "You thought freezing my bank accounts and throwing me out of your little investment fund would break me. You forgot that I am the founder. I am the genius behind the code. Without you holding me back, I am going to take this company public and I am going to be a billionaire. I am going to buy Sarah the biggest mansion in Buckhead, and you will be sitting alone in a hotel room wondering how you let a king slip through your fingers." I did not say a word in response. I just let out another soft, pathetic whimper, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the surface of the table. Marcus pressed the tip of his fountain pen to the paper. He signed his name with large, aggressive, sweeping strokes. He signed the equity transfer claiming all the worthless shares. He signed the absolute liability waiver taking on every single debt. He signed the unconditional indemnification agreement clearing me of any and all responsibility for his shady business operations. The scratching sound of his pen echoing in the cold conference room was honestly the most beautiful music I had ever heard in my entire life. When he reached the final signature line, he pressed down so hard the paper almost tore. He pushed the documents proudly toward the court-appointed mediator, sitting at the head of the table. The older woman adjusted her glasses and carefully reviewed every single signature, verifying the dates and the printed names. She picked up her official heavy metal notary stamp and pressed it firmly onto the bottom of the final page. The loud, solid thud of the ink stamp hitting the table felt exactly like the final strike of a judge gavel. She signed her own name across the seal, officially notarizing the transfer. "These documents are now fully executed and legally binding," the mediator stated in a flat, professional tone. "Mr. Marcus, you are now the sole legal and financial owner of NextGen Solutions. You assume all associated liabilities effective immediately. Vanguard Apex Capital is completely released from this entity." Marcus actually let out a loud, triumphant cheer. He snatched his copy of the executed contract off the table and held it up like a championship trophy. He turned to Gregory and slapped him hard on the shoulder, grinning from ear to ear. "We did it," he boasted loudly. "I finally got my company back. Now call the bank, Gregory. Send them this legal document, tell them to lift the freeze and get my corporate accounts fully operational right now. I have a massive celebration party to plan, and I need to buy my girl some new diamonds." Gregory smiled, pulling out his cell phone to make the call. He was already calculating his massive legal fee in his head, entirely unaware that the bank accounts he was about to call were empty black holes. I sat quietly in my chair for exactly 10 seconds. I listened to the sound of Marcus gloating. I watched him carefully fold the legal document and tuck it safely into the inside pocket of his expensive charcoal suit jacket. I waited until the reality of the legally binding contract settled completely into the atmosphere of the room. I waited until the trap was permanently sealed shut. Then I stopped shaking. The fake panic attacks, the trembling hands, the pathetic whimpers, they all vanished in a single instant. I sat up perfectly straight in my leather chair, adjusting the collar of my tailored silk blouse. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a clean white tissue. I carefully dabbed the corners of my eyes, making absolutely sure not to smudge my expensive mascara. The sudden shift in my physical demeanor was so drastic and so immediate that the entire room went completely silent. Marcus stopped laughing midway through a sentence. Gregory slowly lowered his cell phone from his ear, his brow furrowing in confusion. The mediator looked up from her files, sensing the massive shift in the power dynamic. Richard, who had been playing the role of the defeated lawyer, leaned back in his chair, crossed his legs, and let out a long, satisfied sigh. He actually smiled, a genuine predatory smile. Marcus stared at me, his arrogant grin slowly melting off his face. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice suddenly lacking all of its previous booming confidence. "Why are you smiling, Simone? You just lost everything." I placed the used tissue gently on the mahogany table, smoothing it out with my manicured fingers. I looked directly into his eyes, and the temperature in the room plummeted to absolute freezing. The submissive, weeping wife was completely gone forever. The apex predator of Vanguard Apex Capital had officially returned to the table. "I am smiling, Marcus, because you just did exactly what I needed you to do," I said, my voice cold, clear, and entirely devoid of any emotion. Gregory frowned, looking down at his copy of the contract. What is she talking about, Marcus? He asked, sounding nervous for the very first time. Did you forget to disclose a hidden corporate debt to me? Oh, it is much worse than a hidden corporate debt, Gregory, I replied, leaning forward and resting my forearms firmly on the table. For the last 3 days, I have been sitting in a hotel suite, ignoring your ridiculous restraining order and compiling a massive digital footprint. I needed a foolproof way to completely sever myself from the radioactive wasteland that is Next Gen Solutions before the federal government realized my private equity firm was the primary investor. Marcus swallowed hard, the healthy color beginning to drain rapidly from his face. Federal government. He repeated, his voice barely above a harsh whisper. I stood up slowly from my chair, picking up my heavy designer handbag. I looked down at the pathetic man who had cheated on me, stolen my money, and tried to destroy my reputation with a fake police report. Thank you for volunteering to serve my prison sentence. I watched the exact moment the blood completely drained from Marcus' face. The smug, arrogant mask he had worn into the conference room shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish suffocating on dry land. Gregory, the sleazy attorney, did not wait for his client to find his voice. His legal survival instincts kicked in immediately. He reached across the table and grabbed the pristine white envelope I had just pulled from my designer handbag. He tore it open and pulled out a thick stack of printed financial ledgers alongside a small silver USB drive. Gregory pushed his laptop to the center of the table, plugged the drive in, and began rapidly scrolling through the encrypted files my team had compiled. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the frantic clicking of Gregory pressing the down arrow on his keyboard. With every single file he opened, his face grew paler. Beads of cold sweat began to form on his forehead. You thought you were so incredibly clever, Marcus, I said, my voice breaking the silence with the precision of a surgical scalpel. You thought because I did not micromanage the daily operations of Next Gen Solutions that I was entirely blind to the corporate infrastructure. But my firm monitors every single digital transaction that passes through our subsidiaries. 6 months ago, my forensic accountants flagged a massive anomaly in your payroll system. Marcus gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning completely white. I do not know what you are talking about, he stammered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. My company is completely legitimate. Do not lie to me in front of the mediator, Marcus, I snapped, leaning forward. You set up 7 phantom vendor accounts registered to offshore shell corporations. You took $10 million in dirty, unregulated cryptocurrency from a syndicate operating out of Eastern Europe. You routed that illegal crypto through your startup, masking it as software licensing revenue. Then you paid it out as clean, untraceable cash through your fake vendors, keeping a generous 20% laundering fee for yourself. You used my corporate banking architecture to wash $10 million of federal felony money. Gregory let out a sharp, gasping sound. He pushed the laptop away from him as if the keyboard had suddenly caught fire. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of absolute horror and pure professional rage. You told me this company was a clean tech startup, Gregory shouted, his voice cracking. You told me you were dealing with a simple, jealous wife. You are running a massive international money laundering operation. Do you have any idea what the mandatory federal sentencing guidelines are for a $10 million wire fraud conspiracy? Marcus turned to his lawyer, panic completely overtaking his features. Gregory, calm down, he pleaded, raising his hands defensively. She is making this up. It is a fabricated file. She is just trying to scare us so we give the equity back. It is a direct data pull from the Federal Financial Crimes Database, Marcus. I corrected him, a cold smile playing on my lips. 3 days ago, I handed all of this evidence directly to my contacts at the FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission. A joint task force is currently preparing a massive federal indictment. But there was one major problem I had to solve before they formally issued the arrest warrants. I stood up and slowly paced the length of the conference room, making sure every word I spoke landed with devastating impact. Until 5 minutes ago, Vanguard Apex Capital owned 70% of your fraudulent company, I explained, tracing my hand along the glass wall. Under federal corporate accountability laws, my firm and I would have been held directly liable for the criminal actions of our subsidiary. The government could have frozen my legitimate assets, seized my property, and dragged my pristine reputation through a grueling federal trial. I needed a way to legally sever myself from your toxic wasteland of a company. I stopped pacing and looked directly at the executed contract sitting in front of Marcus. I needed you to sign a master assumption of liability agreement, I said, pointing to the paper. I needed you to formally, legally, and unconditionally claim 100% ownership and 100% retroactive responsibility for every single financial crime committed under the Next Gen umbrella. But I knew that if I simply asked you to sign it, your ego would make you suspicious. I had to make you think you were stealing it from me. I had to make you so desperate to humiliate me that you would blindly sign your own death warrant. You tricked me, Marcus yelled, slamming his fist down on the table. You engineered this entire mediation. You set me up. I will take this to the judge. I have the restraining order. I have the sworn affidavit from your own executive assistant. Elena testified under oath that you are an unstable, violent abuser. I will prove that you coerced me into signing this. I actually laughed out loud. The sound was bright and genuinely amused. You really think you flipped Elena? I asked, shaking my head in pure pity. You think a woman I pay $300,000 a year with full executive benefits would betray me for the pathetic $50,000 bribe you wired to her offshore account? Marcus froze. His eyes darted frantically between me and Richard. Elena has been completely loyal to me since the day I hired her, I explained, sitting back down in my leather chair. The moment you approached her, she immediately reported your blackmail attempt to Richard. We instructed her to play along. We told her to accept your dirty money, which is currently sitting in an FBI escrow account, as physical evidence of witness tampering. I specifically instructed Elena to sign that fake police affidavit. I let the weight of that revelation crush the remaining breath out of his lungs. I told her to give you exactly what you wanted, Marcus. I let you kick me out of my own penthouse. I let you throw that pathetic party with your little mistress and your ignorant mother. I let you feel like an absolute untouchable king because I knew your massive fragile ego needed a victory. I knew that if you felt powerful enough, you would confidently walk into this room today and sign a legal document adopting a $10 million federal crime. Elena is not your star witness, Marcus. She is the federal government star witness against you for criminal extortion and witness tampering. Gregory, the sleazy lawyer, stood up so fast his heavy leather chair tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed dark red with absolute panic. He was an officer of the court, and he had just actively facilitated the fraudulent transfer of a criminally investigated corporate entity. I am completely done, Gregory shouted, grabbing his expensive leather briefcase. He frantically began shoving his loose papers and pens into the bag. He reached across the table, grabbed his copy of the representation contract he had signed with Marcus, and ripped it directly down the middle. He tore the thick parchment into tiny shreds and threw them violently onto the polished mahogany table. Gregory, what are you doing? Marcus begged, reaching out to grab his lawyer arm. You cannot abandon me right now. We have client privilege. You have to defend me. Defend you, Gregory spat, slapping Marcus' hand away with aggressive force. I am legally severing my representation as of this exact second. You lied to me. You involved my law firm in an active federal money laundering conspiracy. You have absolutely no money to pay my retainer, and you are about to be indicted by the United States government. Do not ever call my phone again. If the FBI contacts me, I am turning over every single email you ever sent me. Gregory turned around and practically sprinted out of the conference room, the heavy glass doors swinging wildly behind him. The court-appointed mediator quietly closed her files, stood up, and exited the room without saying a single word, clearly wanting to distance herself from the radioactive fallout. My attorney Richard calmly gathered his notes, placing them neatly into his briefcase. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of professional disgust and deep satisfaction. You should probably call a public defender, Marcus. Richard advised, adjusting his suit jacket. And you might want to pack a small bag. Federal agents prefer to conduct their raids very early in the morning. Richard and I stood up together. I looked at Marcus one last time. He was sitting completely alone at the massive table surrounded by torn pieces of paper and the crushing reality of his total destruction. His custom suit suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for him. The arrogant tech visionary was gone, completely replaced by a terrified, desperate criminal. But true to his narcissistic nature, his brain simply refused to accept the finality of his defeat. He could not process the fact that he had been completely outplayed. As I turned to walk toward the exit, he suddenly stood up, his hands trembling violently as he smoothed down his tie. "This is not over, Simone," he yelled, his voice echoing off the empty glass walls. His eyes were wide and completely manic. "You think the feds are going to scare me? I am a founder. I am an innovator. I have a major gala tonight downtown. I am pitching the new tech integration to a massive billionaire investor from New York. He loves my vision. He is going to inject $20 million into NextGen tonight. I am going to pay off the offshore accounts, clear the audits, and hire a real legal team to crush you. He will bail me out. You will see. I am going to win." I stopped at the door and looked back over my shoulder at the delusional man I had once called my husband. I did not correct him. I did not tell him the truth about his precious billionaire investor. I simply offered him a cold, devastating smile. "Good luck at the gala tonight, Marcus," I said softly. "Make sure you wear a suit that looks good in a mugshot." At 8 o'clock that evening, the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria in downtown Atlanta was completely transformed into a temple of false corporate worship. NextGen Solutions was hosting its annual Innovation Gala, and Marcus had spared absolutely no expense. He had drained the very last drops of his illegal offshore accounts to rent the massive space. Giant crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the room. A live string quartet played classical arrangements of modern pop songs in the corner. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with champagne flutes and expensive caviar canapes. Massive ice sculptures carved into the shape of the company logo slowly melted near the buffet tables. It was a spectacular display of wealth, but every single detail in that room was built on a foundation of massive federal fraud. Marcus was standing near the center of the ballroom, completely surrounded by local tech journalists and minor local celebrities. He was wearing a brand new custom-tailored tuxedo, looking incredibly polished, and desperately trying to hide the sheer panic vibrating underneath his skin. Standing directly next to him was the man he believed to be his ultimate salvation. The man was introduced to the room as Sterling Montgomery. Sterling was supposedly a reclusive tech billionaire from New York who rarely made public appearances. Sterling looked the part perfectly. He had silver hair, wore a subtle but astronomically expensive suit, and spoke with the quiet, confident authority of a man who controlled global markets. Marcus was practically bending over backward to impress Sterling. He laughed loudly at every single comment Sterling made. He aggressively pitched his software integration plans, waving his hands in the air, painting a completely fabricated picture of a company on the verge of massive global dominance. Sterling simply nodded, sipping his sparkling water, offering vague words of encouragement that Marcus eagerly swallowed like a dying man finding water in the desert. Marcus actually believed that this quiet, sophisticated billionaire was going to write him a $20 million check by the end of the night. He believed that this single investment would magically erase his $10 million laundering debt and save him from the federal indictment I had promised him just a few hours earlier in the mediation room. While Marcus was busy begging for his corporate life, his mother Brenda and his 24-year-old mistress Sarah were treating the gala like their own personal coronation. Brenda was wearing a floor-length sequined gown that was entirely too tight and completely inappropriate for a professional corporate event. She was holding court near the open bar, loudly bragging to a group of confused software engineers about her brilliant son. She told anyone who would listen that Marcus had finally shed the dead weight of his bitter, jealous wife and was now ascending to his rightful place among the global elite. She acted as though she had single-handedly built the company herself, basking in the unearned attention. Sarah was standing just a few feet away, completely dripping in the jewelry Marcus had bought her using my embezzled funds. She wore the diamond tennis bracelet on her right wrist and the custom emerald necklace resting heavily against her chest. She posed for pictures with the local bloggers, pouting her lips and showing off her designer dress. She genuinely believed she had successfully stolen a billionaire lifestyle. She was drinking premium champagne and laughing loudly, completely ignorant to the reality of her situation. She had absolutely no idea that she was wearing stolen property that was currently being tracked by the Financial Crimes Division of the federal government. I did not arrive at the gala in a subtle black gown. I did not slip in through the side door to avoid attention. I wanted every single eye in that massive ballroom on me when I finally dropped the guillotine. I stepped out of my private black town car and walked up the marble steps of the Waldorf Astoria, wearing a striking floor-length crimson-red dress. The silk fabric moved like liquid fire around my ankles with every step I took. My hair was styled perfectly, my makeup was sharp and flawless, and I wore absolutely zero jewelry. I did not need diamonds to project power. My power was absolute, internal, and undeniable. When I reached the heavy mahogany double doors of the grand ballroom, I did not wait for the ushers to announce me. I simply placed my hands on the brass handles, pushed the doors open, and stepped inside. The effect was instantaneous. The sea of conservative black tuxedos and muted evening gowns immediately parted for the woman in blood red. The low murmur of networking conversations slowly died down as people turned to look at me. The string quartet seemed to miss a beat. I walked slowly and deliberately through the center of the room, the sharp click of my heels echoing over the sudden hush. I did not look at the confused guests. I ignored the whispers rippling through the crowd. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the raised stage at the front of the room. Marcus had just stepped up to the clear acrylic podium, adjusting the microphone to deliver his highly anticipated keynote address. He tapped the microphone twice, clearing his throat, preparing to officially announce his massive new partnership with Sterling Montgomery. He looked out over the crowd, his bright, arrogant smile securely fastened to his face. Then his eyes landed on me. I watched the color completely drain from his face for the second time that day. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning stark white. He looked completely paralyzed, terrified that I had shown up to ruin his perfect illusion. But because there were hundreds of people watching him, including his fake billionaire savior, he could not call security. He could not throw a tantrum. He had to pretend that my presence was completely normal. He swallowed hard, adjusting his silk bow tie, and leaned into the microphone, trying to regain his composure. "Good evening, everyone." Marcus began, his voice shaking slightly before he forced it into a booming, confident projection. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate the massive future of next-gen solutions. We have overcome some incredible personal and professional obstacles this week. Some people tried to hold this company back. Some people tried to tell us that our vision was too big and our ambitions were too dangerous. But tonight, we are proving them all wrong." Brenda clapped loudly from the front row, cheering aggressively for her son. Sarah smiled, blowing him a kiss from across the room. "Tonight is not just about our software," Marcus continued, gesturing grandly toward the front VIP table where Sterling Montgomery was sitting. "Tonight is about massive global expansion. We are incredibly honored to welcome a new lead investor into the next-gen family. A man who sees our true potential and is ready to take us to the absolute top of the industry. Please put your hands together for Mr. Sterling Montgomery." The ballroom erupted into polite applause. Marcus smiled widely, looking down at me standing just a few feet away from the edge of the stage. His eyes were practically screaming with vindictive pride. He thought he had done it. He thought he had officially secured the massive injection of cash that would save him from my wrath. He thought he had beaten me at my own game. I did not clap. I simply smiled a cold, predatory smile and walked directly up the short flight of stairs leading to the stage. Marcus froze as I stepped onto the platform. He tried to subtly shift his body to block my path to the podium, but I simply bypassed him entirely, walking with an intimidating grace that he could not match. The crowd fell completely silent, watching the intense silent war radiating off the stage. Marcus reached out to grab my arm, but he stopped when he saw the absolute dead serious look in my eyes. He knew that if he touched me, I would completely destroy him right there in front of the cameras. I stepped right up to the acrylic podium. Marcus stood awkwardly to my left, his chest heaving with silent panic. I reached out and took the microphone directly out of its stand. I looked out over the massive sea of faces. I looked at Brenda frozen in her sequined dress, her hands hovering mid-clap. I looked at Sarah clutching her stolen emerald necklace, her confused eyes darting around the room. And finally, I looked down at Sterling Montgomery, sitting calmly at the front table, completely unfazed by the sudden interruption. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing loudly and clearly through the massive ballroom commanding absolute authority. "I know you are all incredibly excited to hear about the bright future of next-gen solutions. Marcus has painted a beautiful picture for you tonight. He has told you a highly curated story about innovation, about overcoming obstacles, and about securing massive financial investment." I turned my head slightly to look at Marcus. He was sweating profusely, staring at me with a look of pure, unadulterated terror, his chest rising and falling rapidly. But there is one crucial detail that the chief executive officer conveniently forgot to mention in his keynote address. I continued, turning my attention back to the crowd. He forgot to tell you who actually funded this entire event. He forgot to tell you that the premium champagne you are currently drinking was purchased with stolen offshore cryptocurrency. And most importantly, he forgot to tell you my true role in tonight's highly anticipated celebration. "I am the architect of his absolute ruin," I said, my voice projecting with crystal clear authority over the silent crowd. "I am the chief executive officer of Vanguard Apex Capital. For the last 3 years, I have been the sole silent investor, keeping this fraudulent company from drowning. And yesterday I discovered that my husband was not just failing at business. He was actively using my corporate banking infrastructure to launder $10 million of illegal cryptocurrency for an international criminal syndicate." A collective gasp rippled through the massive ballroom. The tech journalists in the front row immediately pulled out their phones, recording every single word. Marcus stumbled backward away from the podium as if the microphone had suddenly caught fire. He shook his head frantically, raising his hands toward the crowd. "Do not listen to her," he yelled, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "She is a disgruntled ex-wife. She is lying. She is mentally unstable, and she is trying to ruin my reputation because we are getting a divorce. Look at the investor I brought in tonight. Look at Sterling Montgomery. A billionaire would never associate with a criminal enterprise." I turned my gaze away from Marcus and looked directly down at the VIP table. "You are absolutely right, Marcus," I said, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. "A legitimate billionaire would never associate with you." At that exact moment, the distinguished silver-haired man known as Sterling Montgomery calmly stood up from his chair. He did not look panicked. He did not look confused. He buttoned his expensive suit jacket, picked up his crystal water glass, and took a final sip. He set the glass down and reached into his breast pocket. He did not pull out a luxury pen or a corporate checkbook. He pulled out a heavy leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a solid gold federal shield. "Allow me to formally introduce the guest of honor," I announced, leaning closer into the microphone. "This is Special Agent Sterling Montgomery of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. And he has been building a federal indictment against you since the moment you poured him his first glass of stolen champagne." Marcus stared at the federal badge shining under the crystal chandeliers. His mouth fell open, but no sound came out. His brain completely short-circuited, unable to process the magnitude of the trap he had blindly walked right into. Before Marcus could even take a single step toward the stage stairs, the heavy mahogany double doors at the back of the ballroom violently burst open. "Federal agents, nobody move!" A booming voice echoed through the room. The live string quartet abruptly stopped playing. Dozens of heavily armed FBI agents wearing dark tactical vests with yellow lettering stormed into the glamorous ballroom. The sheer contrast of federal raid gear against the sea of expensive tuxedos and evening gowns was absolutely staggering. The agents moved with terrifying precision, fanning out across the room and securing every single exit. The wealthy guests shrieked and scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the walls to get out of the way of the federal raid. Two senior FBI agents marched straight down the center aisle, their eyes locked completely on the stage. Marcus finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The arrogant tech visionary who had boasted about his legacy just minutes ago completely vanished. He looked like a terrified child. He turned around wildly, looking for a back exit behind the stage curtain, but two more agents were already stepping out from the shadows, cutting off his escape route. "Marcus, you are under federal arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and corporate embezzlement," Agent Montgomery stated loudly, walking up the stairs to the stage. "No, wait, please," Marcus begged, holding his hands up as the agents surrounded him right at the acrylic podium. "You do not understand. I signed a document today. I took liability, but I did not know about the crypto. My wife set me up. Simone, tell them to stop. Tell them it was a corporate misunderstanding." I stood 2 feet away from him, my arms resting comfortably at my sides. I looked at the tears streaming down his face, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. I did not say a word. I simply watched as the senior FBI agent grabbed Marcus by the arms, spun him around, and forced his chest down onto the clear acrylic podium. The sharp, unmistakable click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping around his wrists echoed through the microphone, broadcasting his absolute defeat to the entire ballroom. In the front row, the grand illusion of the family matriarch completely shattered. Brenda realized that her golden boy was not a genius entrepreneur, but a federal criminal being hauled away in chains. She pushed her way through the terrified crowd, her sequined dress catching the harsh lights. "Get your hands off my son!" Brenda screamed, her voice tearing through the room. She swung her designer handbag wildly at one of the tactical agents, trying to physically intervene. "He is a good boy. He is a successful black man. You are destroying him for no reason." "Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be charged with assaulting a federal officer," an agent barked, holding his hand up to block her path. Brenda hit the invisible wall of federal authority, and her entire reality collapsed. The proud, boastful woman who had defended his infidelity and celebrated my eviction dropped to her knees right there on the ballroom carpet. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically, her church hat tumbling onto the floor. She wailed in pure agony, mourning the permanent death of the fake kingdom she had worshipped for so long. Across the room, the 24-year-old mistress realized that the party was officially over. Sarah saw the federal agents slapping handcuffs on the man she thought was going to buy her a mansion in Buckhead. She looked down at the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist and the custom emerald necklace around her neck, realizing she was wearing stolen federal evidence. Panic completely consumed her. She dropped her crystal champagne flute, letting it shatter on the marble floor. Sarah turned around and bolted. She slipped past the catering tables, dodging the wealthy guests, and pushed her way through the heavy velvet curtains leading to the side exit of the hotel lobby. She was desperate to escape the federal raid and get back to the luxury midtown condominium before the authorities seized it. She burst through the side doors into the quiet, dimly lit corridor of the Waldorf Astoria, breathing heavily and hiking up her expensive designer dress to run faster. She reached the end of the hallway, pushing open the glass doors leading out to the valet parking area. But she did not make it to a taxi. Standing directly in the center of the valet driveway, blocking her only path to freedom, was her older sister. Chloe was no longer wearing her soft cashmere wellness instructor outfits. She was wearing a sharp, dark trench coat, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face completely devoid of any sympathy. Sitting on the concrete curb right next to her feet were two cheap plastic trash bags. Sarah stopped dead in her tracks, her chest heaving. "Chloe, please, you have to help me," Sarah pleaded, tears ruining her makeup. "The FBI is inside. They are arresting Marcus. I need a ride to the condo. I need to pack my things before they freeze his assets." Chloe did not yell. She did not lecture her sister about the gray areas of morality. She took 2 steps forward and raised her hand. Chloe delivered a slap so fierce and so utterly devastating that it physically knocked Sarah off balance. The sharp crack echoed loudly against the stone pillars of the hotel driveway. Sarah stumbled backward, pressing her hand against her burning cheek, staring at her sister in absolute shock. "You do not have a condo anymore," Chloe said, her voice colder than ice. "The federal government seized the property 20 minutes ago. The locks are changed and the bank accounts are frozen." Chloe reached down and kicked one of the black plastic trash bags toward Sarah's feet. The bag split open slightly, revealing a pile of cheap sweatpants and t-shirts. "I went to the condo before the feds locked it down." Chloe continued, staring down at the pathetic homewrecker. "I packed exactly what you owned before you started sleeping with my brother-in-law and spending stolen money. You are walking away with nothing, Sarah. You have no money. You have no wealthy boyfriend. And as of tonight, you absolutely have no family." Sarah fell to her knees on the cold concrete, clutching the plastic trash bag, sobbing as the harsh reality of her greed finally caught up with her. Chloe turned her back on her biological sister and walked away into the dark Atlanta night, leaving her completely alone on the street. Back inside the grand ballroom, the ultimate takedown was complete. The FBI agents marched Marcus directly down the center aisle of the room. The crowd parted silently, watching the disgraced founder being paraded through his own gala in handcuffs. As they led him toward the exit, Marcus stopped, pulling slightly against the grip of the agents. He turned his head and looked back at the stage. He looked at me, standing tall and completely unbothered in my crimson-red dress. I was looking down at him from the exact podium where he had planned to celebrate his stolen victory. He finally understood that he had never been the king. He had only been a pawn playing on a board that I entirely controlled. I did not offer him a sympathetic look. I did not gloat into the microphone. I simply raised my hand and gave him a slow, dismissive wave goodbye. The agents jerked his arms forward, pulling him out of the ballroom and into the custody of the federal penal system. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind him, closing the final chapter on his pathetic delusion. The empire was burned to ashes and the queen remained firmly on her throne. The heavy mahogany doors of the Waldorf Astoria clicked shut, and the grand illusion of Marcus and his tech empire vanished forever. I did not stay in the ballroom to answer frantic questions from the tech journalists or watch the federal agents secure the building. I simply turned around and walked out into the cool Atlanta night air. The chaos of that evening slowly fades away in my memory, replaced by the absolute quiet of my true sanctuary. The scene around me shifts seamlessly from the blinding crystal chandeliers of the gala back to the warm amber glow of my penthouse living room. I am sitting right back where this entire story began. I am resting on my velvet sofa, looking out over the sprawling city skyline, holding a glass of expensive red wine. It has been over a year since that explosive night. The federal trial was swift and absolutely brutal. Because Marcus had so arrogantly signed that master liability agreement, he had absolutely no legal defense. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. His fake tech startup was entirely liquidated to pay off his massive restitution. Brenda was forced to downsize to a tiny one-bedroom apartment, still telling her new neighbors that her brilliant son was framed by a jealous wife. Sarah is currently working as a barista in the suburbs, permanently cut off from her sister Chloe, who finally filed for divorce from Jamal. And my former assistant Elena accepted a plea deal that guarantees she will never work in corporate finance ever again. As for me, Vanguard Apex Capital just closed its most profitable quarter in corporate history. I reclaimed my penthouse, I reclaimed my peace, and I reclaimed my absolute authority over my own life. Let my story serve as a permanent warning to anyone listening. Do not ever let anyone convince you to shrink your success just to accommodate their fragile ego. Do not let society guilt you into financing your own disrespect. If you enjoyed this story of absolute justice, please leave a comment below, letting me know your thoughts. Hit the like button and make sure to subscribe for more stories of women taking their power back. I lift my crystal glass and take the final sip of my red wine. The dark liquid is smooth and perfectly rich. I set the empty glass down on the marble coffee table. I look directly forward, a deep, satisfying calm washing over my entire body. Marcus wanted to act like an untouchable king while treating me like a peasant. He said he needed space. Now he has a cozy 6 by 8 foot cell in federal prison. Never back a woman into a corner when she built her empire with her own hands. She will not just take back what is hers, she will burn your kingdom to the ground.